Dumb and Dumber. The almost insoluble task is to let neither the power of others nor our own powerlessness stupefy us. Theodore Wiesengrund Adorno. A league of assaults on life's constitutional dubiety has marginalized the prime driver of creativity. Revenants carry on ruining humanity's wisdom in its renewed embryonic stage. Tentacles of the persistent idiocy doctrine have the same devastating social bearing across the globe. The cynic dogmas always expand out of everyone's complacency. Attempts to sink villainy into oblivion should not be perceived as an act of heroism. No one deserves applauses for taking on the vicious psychosomatic monster of all. I am myself not innocent. There was a time in my life when my tolerance was based on a naive standard deviation of follies. I was just mildly discourteous to dummies who pat their own backs for democratizing a slum. I was not hypersensitive to imbeciles who swear that they don't see either race or gender. I should have used as a punching bag the face of idiots whose idea of improving living standards in war-ravaged regions is to allocate a pig to a family. Then again, it was hard at the time to fathom all psycho genes bottled in one zealot. One has to take time to eavesdrop on conversations throughout the socioeconomic pyramid to actually raise global devastation and self-awareness to an alien level. Dare walk in any revered knowledge atelier, regardless if it's in the West, East, North, or South, center, and you will be overwhelmed by the cyanic odor of dialectic bollocks. In these laboratories, upcoming financial czars, as well as international organizations' kingpins, proselytize the concept of marginal common sense. Their crappy model, based on the white man burden and race hierarchy, writes off from the equations paranoid despots and glutinous buffoons. In doing so, the partial justice's derivative function approach dwarfs the psychological instability halting these poor nations' growth in commerce. Pathetic assumptions mold the interpretation of societal norms, commerce, and trade, and adds political neutrality to their moral depravity. There's no need to be worried about the stench of this puerile charter. The unparalleled mastering of the art of paddling prejudice is squeaky clean. There's an outrageous amount of energy squandered around the nerve-wracking jingle. Increase in wages automatically triggers the robotization of supermarkets and job cuts. Such claims have proven to be immaculately erroneous. The end of brown and dark people's slavery, of child labor, in addition to shorter workdays, and employment benefits, have demonstrated that human dignity and labor class exploitation successes are not mutually exclusive. I loathe minimum wage more than arrogant and judgmental billionaires. Where they and I are calling for the abolishment of minimum wage, I want to destroy the outdated notion that the ones at the bottom's lives have less value. I have yet to find solidarity towards my cause. The notion of the minimum wage has made wealth distribution schizophrenia highly functional. The betterment of labor attained without the slaving robots illustration is an open hypocrisy at worst, or mere inconsistency at best. It is imperative for robots to be enslaved and to replace human muscles and embarrassments in order to break the shackles off the minimum wage encumbrance. What is there to say about inane celebrities' jaunts away from playing hero in the fantasy world to grapple with palpable social defiance? 2 thumbs up to corporatism. These trendy crossovers hypnotize the public, swells the horrific for the greater good pseudo-excuses, and spruces up absurdities. The standing ovation given to these jesters do nothing other than wreck the hopes of billions of souls in the dark world and sentimentalized ghettos. These unbearable spectacles do not awake common sense and firmness in dirt-poor nations. And Banlu. When all bets are off, humiliation and misery drive customarily sympathetic folks and defectors towards violent extremes. Religion and guns. It should not come as a surprise to any well-balanced brain that inequality serves to further fuel the ire of those who've experienced injustice and provides a motive for shocking antiphons. To write history is as important as to make history. If the writer does not remain true to the maker, then the unchanging truth takes on a quality that will confuse the humanity. Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. I'm fed up with how, all over the globe, we come to eulogize Andrew Carnegie, John Pierpont Morgan Sr., John D. Rockefeller, and Cornelius Vanderbilt as great entrepreneurs. These despicable human beings have been crowned as the men who put the entire globe on the right track. Their inflated goodwill has become the credo of cigar capitalists' rationalization of widening the golden gates of pure evil, and for the decriminalization of greed. Voices condemning their evil tactics are the target of opprobrium. For this insult, I must credit my contemporary amnesia when it comes to the Industrial Revolution. There's no need to procure a shovel to unearth the trail of inhumaneness left behind from their wicked dealings and exploits. They consolidated supreme power and influence while aggressively stockpiling gems and collecting unnecessary prestige. All over the globe, the attribute of a free market playing field bent on competitor strangulation, their cadavers left behind for a corrupted head of state to bag and trash, is baleful. What Andrew Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, John D. Rockefeller, and Cornelius Vanderbilt called bringing order in the chaotic system was nothing more than halting the social revolution. Their pioneered business cartels are indeed cases of unnecessary, disgraceful evil. To get a sense of their commitment to renovated slavery and world domination, these malefactors financed a political heist and successfully got their pie on. William McKinley, elected as the 25th U.S. president, who went on to roll back every regulation that stood in his benefactor's way to pile up even more wealth. Today, this blueprint to amass Mazuma and corner public policies has been rolled out all over the globe by these ever-covetous, affluent thugs. The individuals consumed with guilt who stumbled into the White House to break ranks with the corrupt establishment were a source of opposition for the seething industrialists and were instrumental to the 20th century social, commerce, and trade and political insurgency. Antitrust beatings of the robber barons imposed new commerce traditions, or at least reversed the dehumanization of labor cycle. The situation also burst the door wide open for a new breed of less vicious business manipulators like Henry Ford. There's irrefutable evidence that the Industrial Revolution rat pack stagnated wealth distribution and social justice. Right after their monopoly was decapitated for the first time, white Americans were able to afford things that they made. The U.S. Industrial Revolution cannot be reconciled with academic integrity and the modern, sanctioned, aesthetic free market doctrine. And so, capitalism is not compatible with human and artistic growth and development. In the present day, the backdrop of the American Civil War has been embellished with the heroic allegory of the Northern free and enlightened states, who pushed the tradition of humanism down the throats of Southern slave and brutish states. It is one example of the powerful nation's puppeteers' common tradition of recoding history. Even though the truth has been obscured in the mists of partisanship going beyond the U.S. borders, it is never lost. For those who still have their heads, the U.S. Civil War was about two competing modes of exploitation: expected slavery in the South and accepted slavery in the North, over American territorial expansion to the Pacific coast as the spoils of the Mexican-American War. The remnants of the U.S.'s pre-Civil War's inhumane racialist customs are still violently experienced today. To appreciate my devotion to anti-monopoly and to comprehend my devoutness to anti-privatization, it is deemed necessary to compartmentalize the two different sentiments. The thin and twisted rope connecting Arkansas to the Egyptians' remake of the Arab Spring that led to a multi-part swap of modern-time pharaohs says a lot about our social interconnectivity. What we have today is the moral ground of antitrust laws that prevent one manic moneyer's hunger from blatantly gobbling up an entire sector of humans' needs or wants. Instead, global paranoia has been used by international pillagers and their sponsors to break developing countries' safeguard nets and activate the foreignization of their national economies. With one sailing across science and another crawling down the theological cliff, they will both end up disillusioned and unsusceptible. It's a matter of time before one is sucked into political, highly subsidized, scientific, and religious idiocies. The human inability to sustain pain or avoid blame could lead us to look through rose-colored glasses, agonizing over historical events. In this shadowy painting of the world, how does a nonconformist mindset preserve an appropriate measure of sanity and integrity? No, Massa, it's best I had no learning, for many learned men be great fools. Negro Tom. There is no shame in not knowing. This virtue is foreign to arrogance. An academic surgical dissection of beatified Los Pistoleros classics do not lead a scaredy cat to doubt of lumpen intellectuals' holiness. Time can change contextual meaning, but not the intent. Plunging in the intent of extravagant claimants opens a can of blameless worms that indubitably humanized celebrated deities and undermined their legacy. For so long, the world was being fed numerous lies in order to underwrite social constructs. A wide range of ostentatious denigrations have become accepted as truth. Their longevity is born out of the modern peasant's dialectic complacency and preposterousness of academic grandees. Philosophy is an Olympian cerebral isometric, squeezing out authenticity from the basket of uncertainties. It is slated to be the ridiculous pursuit of understanding us, for self-awareness' sake. Folks in one part of the world intuitively picture unfamiliar spots as hotbeds of brutes. For inappropriate premises which are added to devious motives, Immanuel Kant has been crowned as the greatest philosopher of modern times. I sought his guidance to explain the origin of different human races, and particularly Negroes, as this was to become my cultural compass. The growth of the spongy parts of the body had to increase in a hot and humid climate. This growth produced a thick, turned-up nose and thick, fatty lips. The skin had to be oily, not only to lessen the too heavy perspiration, but also to ward off the harmful absorption of foul, humid air, the profusion of iron particles, which are otherwise found in the blood of every human being and, in this case, is precipitated in the net-shaped substance through the evaporation of the phosphoric acid, which explains why all Negroes stink, is the cause of the blackness that shines through the epidermis. Besides all this, humid warmth promotes the strong growth of animals. In short, all of these factors account for the origin of the Negro, who is well suited to this climate, namely being strong, fleshy, and agile. However, because his motherland so amply supplies him, he is also lazy, indolent, and dawdling. Right now, I need to pause. All marsupials delegated to the species lower on the totem pole, please allow me to get on Kant's stupidity level by sensationalizing Cheikh Anta Diop's counterpunch, two-cradle theory. My depiction of Cracker's origin is, the dwindling of the spongy parts of the body had to be caused by cold and dry climate. This degeneration produced a thin, protruding, beak-pointed nose and thin lips. The skin had to be dry and translucent as a protective measure due to poor hygienic practices, and in this case, in case they get wet, the thick waste coating the epidermis is diluted, which explains why all crackers smell like wet dogs. Besides all this, dry cold promotes homosexuality. In short, all of these factors account for the origin of the cracker, who is well suited to this climate, namely, gangly, aggressive, with a disgust for existence, pessimism, the enslavement of women, and moral deprivations. However, because his arid and cold environment does not yield long-term subsistence, he is also sadistic, parochialistic, and hysterical. If you applaud my basest retort, then you are a Neanderthal. Claims can be constructed to account for East Asian slanted eyes or to generalize about unpleasant Arab breath. In the same spirit of the Hippocratic Oath, not harm, the scientific inquiry should refrain itself from providing asinine evidence to offensive stereotypes. Albert Einstein claimed that racism is a disease of white people. He ignored or had no clue about other races' bigotries, Japan's notion of ethnic purity, or the idea that Russian blacks are not necessarily black. Poor indigenous people in Bolivia cultivate pity and disdain for blacks. Black Africans frown upon any female who consorts with white men. Another overrated and oversighted phantom, David Hume, whom I assumed wasn't aware of the Sankore University, which was established in the early 1300s in Timbuktu, wrote, I am apt to suspect the Negroes and in general all other species of men, for there are 4 or 5 different kinds, to be naturally inferior to the whites. There never was a civilized nation of any other complexion than white, nor even any individual eminent either in action or speculation. No ingenious manufactures amongst them, no arts, no sciences. On the other hand, the rudest and barbarous of the whites, such as the ancient Germans, the present Tartars, have still something eminent about them in their valor, the form of government, or some other particular. There is consistency in beatified Caucasian analytical heroes in the racism marathon. Every race deserves a medal of completion for their contribution to this absurd saga. Ibn Khaldun is an African who firmly believed that geometry enlightens the intellect and sets one's mind right. He is often viewed as one of the godfathers of modern economics, especially monetary economics. Yuck. The man is credited with observing and articulating the benefit of the division of labor in his book Kitab al-Albar, long before Adam Smith wrapped it around the concepts pocketed from the French physiocrats. In addition, Khaldun brilliantly introduced the labor theory of value centuries ahead of David Ricardo. He also blurted, Beyond to the south, there is no civilization in the proper sense. There are only humans who are closer to dumb animals than to rational beings. They live in thickets and caves and eat herbs and unprepared grain. They frequently eat each other. They cannot be considered human beings. Every century seems to start and end with Western bigoted synthesis reigning supreme over the universe. In the middle of the journey, the entirety of humanity pours excessive veneration upon disgraceful human beings appointed as the great thinkers of their time. The most despicable case has to be Gandhi. I am deeply disturbed every time Mahatma Gandhi is politely called a great soul by anyone who is not bravely wearing a swastika sign. The unrepentant pedophile offered jurisprudence to the Indians in South Africa under the apartheid system. He believed in the purity of races. For Bapu, Indians were undoubtedly inferior to Caucasians, but he lamented that we could understand not being classed with whites, but to be placed on the same level as the natives seemed too much to put up with. Kafirs are, as a rule, uncivilized. The convicts even more so. They are troublesome, filthy, and live like animals. There's a sickening inconsistency in the John Locke, the father of liberalism, and the enlightened François-Marie Arouet, Voltaire, assertion that all men are equal while benighted perspective of reason by investing heavily their cash in the slave trade. But the French aristocrat Joseph Arthur is an alarming example of the far-reaching costs of prolonging prejudicial hypotheses. With no clue on how to conduct scientific research, he became marvelously famous for developing the theory of the Aryan master race. He bundled up people by their skin colors and affirmed that intelligence quotient is determined by genetic inheritance. And the Third Reich made his irrational mantra a centerpiece of their orchestrated carnage. Today, low-life skinheads and vacuous scientific racists and misogynists chant out the rash suspicion to provide grounds for a commitment to absurdity that's enshrined within academia. A good breakthrough cannot be expected by merely appealing to people's existing traditions. In the West, East, North, and South, scientific prejudice runs deep in academia's veins. Bias is a pettifogging moral imbalance as value significances fluctuate. On the other hand, prejudicial behavior inflicts severe damage upon the entire society that seeks to deprive another individual's social equity. As we stay on the same dance floor, we can predict, with the highest degree of certainty, the worsening of social injustice and recurring commerce and trade tragedies on a global scale. Only to the rude ear of one who is quite indifferent does the song of a bird seem always the same. Rosa Luxemburg. The prolonged effect of this synthetic omnipotence pales in comparison to the shift in the ravaging clandestine war over the control of homogeneous minds. The whipping gain made by science over religion was credited for the moderation of bigotry, racism, sexism, slavery, and other flamboyant absurdities. Other results are perplexing. Contemporary scientific triumphs have led to the intellectualization of every conversation. In this craze, Western cognoscenti is believed to be infallible, and its byblows are viewed as deities in the enclaves of academic ghettos around the globe. You might be puzzled by Kant, Hume, Diop, Gandhi, and Khaldoon's racist verbal diarrhea. How could such highly esteemed canvassers of human comportments and luminance be capable of such terrible ignorance? When people attempt to preserve traditional crafts, we ought to applaud their efforts. The past enriches contemporary culture. In some instances, we ought to take extreme measures to correct historical glitches. People like Kant and Hume, just to name the few, and the iconic prejudices embedded in their works have had an untold amount of devastating damage for centuries. Rendering their whole kit and caboodle null more than sets an example or a warning to other bellicose scientific racists. It ends the applause for their mischief and possibly cures humanity of cogent arguments dysentery. Who is Eugene Carl Düring? Every injustice ruse relies heavily on psychology in order to manipulate the collective wisdom into believing in the illusion of rightness. Unless you've been in the trenches, staring at economic academia without intimidation, you are undoubtedly wondering about the specific charges which I pose against capitalism. These are different from the current caseload and exhibits you have become desensitized to. It is no easy task to turn the switch on underpinning problems which I am jabbing into your brain. To burst your constellation-like view or bubble, I should fall back to history and lure you into a dreadful act of treason and stupidity galore. Dred Scott versus Sanford, 1857. Less than a century after Olaudah Equiano published his memoir, Dred Scott, a Negro, attempted to sue for his freedom on the basis of his extended stay with his owner in states and territories where slavery was illegal. In framing his case in such an awful way, he ratified the idea that being human is not a thing all human beings are all entitled to by virtue of simply being human. Dumb. In this landmark decision, the U.S. Supreme Court denied Scott's request and stipulated that neither he nor any other person of African ancestry could claim citizenship in the United States because they were properties, like a chair or a pig. Dumber. In Scott's mind, and the U.S. Supreme Court at the time, unless a group of living human beings fulfills ambiguous prerogatives of being human, they are objects. I have no sympathy for Scott, for he had no intention of taking down slavery. If he was admitted to being a free man, I wager that he would have exercised the privilege of being human and purchased his own slaves. I would not expect anything else from a judicial system that is still trying to find its way back to bigoted days. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, lumpen intellectuals have been galloping all over the globe, delivering an intense harangue to vindicate social, commerce, and trade and political class ranks. They perpetuate social injustices of any form as a normal consequence of nature. For them, we are nothing more than a disposable means of production, and only a small number of us, the rich, are special creatures, human beings. In these days and times, this mephitic evangel has gained more scholastic grounds. The 99%ers still foolishly upholding this sordid and mortifying social contract are dumb and dumber.